Governor Dean, thank you so much for coming back to your show.
Thanks for having me on.
Matthew from North Glen writes in saying, our current president seems to have taken it upon himself to run our government entirely to his own taste, without advice or assistance. How can he be sure that when Senator Obama is elected that he's going to seek counsel and advice on important issues like Iraq, education, and health care?
Well, Senator Obama is very different than George Bush or John McCain, who seem to be more interested in actually having power than in the public. I mean, John McCain's a guy who doesn't seem to even know how many houses he has. Barack is standing up for ordinary Americans. And one of the things he's done in his campaign, which has made him so popular, is actually ask the opinion of ordinary Americans before he puts out his policy views. So what you're going to see from him, he's also not afraid of really smart people because he's pretty smart himself. So I think what you're going to see is some really smart people, and he said this in his vice presidential selection, who will be free to disagree with him. So they'll have real debate about what the right thing to do is, and then I think you get to a much better decision about what the right thing to do for America is if you hear from lots of Americans and not just Dick Cheney, who seems to be making the policy right now.
And here in Colorado, we're already seeing lots of commercials from both sides. Some of them, they started positive, some of them now going back and forth. Dennis writes in from Aurora, wants to know, he says, John Kerry lost 2004 election, his words primarily, he feels, because he failed to respond to attack ads being run by the Republicans. They're obviously doing the same thing this year. His question, should we accept the inevitable Republican victory now, or are the Democrats going to do something different?
Well, I think you've seen since probably that question was sent in that we are doing something different. We're not putting up with the nonsense about not knowing how many houses you have. You guys clearly out of touch with where most Americans are. We're not going to put up with this ridiculous proposal the other day that we should renegotiate the Colorado Water Compact. Here's a senator from the West who basically comes to Colorado and says, I'm from Arizona, give me your water. He's running for president of the United States. This is not a guy who even understands the West, let alone ordinary Americans. So we're not going to stand for that. One of the things the American people expect is for you to be tough if you're president, and Barack Obama is much tougher than I think the Republicans thought he was, and we're going to have to respond in kind when they go out. We don't want to run a negative campaign because Barack's thing is to bring people together, but we're not going to put up with the kind of distortions and nonsense that have been going on, this divisive, ugly politics that the Republicans seem to think is necessary in order to win elections.
You've heard that kind of a question before, though, right? I mean, this is not something this is a sentiment felt by a lot of Democrats.
Well, I think you've seen a pretty good counterattack in the last couple of weeks, and I think you're going to see more. We're not going to put up with this. The first task in making America strong again is to stand up strongly against this divisive ugliness and this made-up nonsense, and we're not going to put up with it.
Maybe the most prevalent criticism of Senator Obama has been his experience, and you and I were talking before we went on. Andrew writes in from Loveland saying, you don't hire a person out of college to be CEO, even if you want to take your company in a new direction. Senator Obama's positioned himself as an agent of change because he's not one of the D.C. politicians. Many Americans don't trust politicians, so it's little wonder that that message of change resonates. But how do we respond, he writes in, to such an empty resume? How is the senator able to convince so many people they should vote in, his words, a new college graduate to be CEO of the country?
The last time we invested the presidency, our trust in the President of the United States, who had served a term in Congress and a term in the Illinois State Legislature, the president's name was Abraham Lincoln. And Barack himself has made the point, your judgment is what matters. John McCain has been in the Senate for 22 years, in the House for 4, 26 years in Washington. Lobbyists are running his campaign. Lobbyists have paid for his campaign. He voted to get us into Iraq. His tax policy is give ExxonMobil bigger tax breaks. Judgment matters. So I somehow believe that John McCain's 26-year resume of experience in the United States Senate has made him a worse leader and a less capable of being the President of the United States than Barack Obama, because Barack Obama is going to stand up for ordinary Americans. He's much closer to the experience of ordinary Americans, raised by a single mom. I mean, he came up the hard way. John McCain can't keep track of how many houses he's got. This is not a contest here. There's one guy who's really suited to be President of the United States because of who he is and what his judgment is, and his name is Barack Obama.
You talk about judgment. I'm glad you brought up that word, because Robin Golden wrote in saying, assume there's a foreign policy crisis, a potential nuclear issue. What in Senator Obama's background gives you faith that he would be more qualified than Senator McCain?
Because I don't trust Senator McCain's judgment. I personally heard him say things that I'm sure will come out later in the campaign about the use of nuclear weapons that I was appalled at. We need somebody with steady, thoughtful self-confidence, who's not afraid to surround himself by knowledgeable people who may disagree with him. That describes Barack Obama. It does not describe John McCain.
Segue to some questions about you and questions you have or issues that you may have. Jose writes in, Silva, 28-year-old here in Denver. What's your message to young kids who are living in poverty, such as those here in Denver, who really have nowhere to turn because of a lack of funding for nonprofits, community groups that can't provide the basic services needed?
Well, the first thing is I think Barack has already spoken about better funding for community groups. That's a big difference between him and Senator McCain. Senator McCain wouldn't even fund veterans. He is a veteran. He wouldn't even fund the Veterans Administration adequately. So you're not going to get much relief there. One of the best things I've heard Barack Obama say about this is that he's willing to continue a form of faith-based initiative. You can't discriminate against people in your hiring, and you can't use federal money to proselytize and spread your religion, but you can help religious-based organizations who are trying to do things for kids and seniors and so forth. Now, that's important for two reasons. First of all, he recognizes that faith-based organization services have some benefit. And second of all, he is reaching across the ideological chasm that the Republicans have created in this country in the last 30 years so they could win elections and bringing in people of faith and evangelicals. We may not get the evangelical vote. I don't think we will get a majority evangelical vote. But we will break down the barriers which have prevented anything from getting done in this country in the last 30 years when we start working with people who may disagree with us about some things but will agree with us on others. That is very important, and that is the difference between Barack Obama, who's the politics of the future, and John McCain, who's the politics of the past.